You're standing in the Egyptian wing of your local museum, staring at a golden death mask that millions of Americans have seen on touring exhibitions since the 1970s. The placard tells you about divine pharaohs, ancient glory, architectural marvels. But here's what that museum placard will never tell you. That beautiful golden mask is hiding a face destroyed by 3,000 years of systematic incest. A face so deformed that ancient embalmers spent days trying to make the corpse look normal. A face that tells the real story of Egyptian royalty. One so disturbing that even today, museums won't put it on their little information cards. What if I told you that virtually every pharaoh you've heard of was both a product and perpetrator of incest, so extreme it would make the Habsburgs look like champions of genetic diversity? That Cleopatra, Hollywood's ultimate beauty, was actually the result of 300 years of brother-sister marriages so intense that her family tree looked more like a family stick. That King Tut, Egypt's most famous pharaoh, couldn't walk without canes because his parents were siblings, his grandparents were siblings, and his great-grandparents were probably siblings too. This isn't ancient propaganda from Rome trying to make Egypt look bad. This is modern DNA evidence, skeletal analysis, and medical imaging that's been available for decades. Yet walk into any museum in America right now, the Met, the Smithsonian, your local history museum, and you won't find a single mention of it. The 3,000-year cover-up that started with the pharaohs themselves continues today, right here in our own institutions. But once you know what to look for, you can't unsee it. It's in every statue's strangely elongated skull, every mummy's clubbed foot, every royal child who died before age 5. And there were so many dead children. The evidence has been staring at us from inside every pyramid, every tomb, every sarcophagus for centuries. We just chose not to see it. Picture yourself as Howard Carter in 1922, the moment his candle flame flickered across Tutankhamun's tomb. The air, thick with the dust of 3 millennia, carries the sweet, cloying smell of ancient resins and decay. As his eyes adjust, he sees the glint of gold everywhere, but something else catches his attention. Walking sticks. Not 5 or 10 ceremonial staffs, but 130 of them. Some worn smooth from use, others showing the unmistakable marks of a limping gait wearing down one side more than the other. "Can you see anything?" Lord Carnarvon asks from behind him. "Yes," Carter whispers. "Wonderful things." But Carter, in that moment, is already seeing something that doesn't fit. Why would a 19-year-old god king need more walking aids than your local nursing home? Think about the last time you saw a documentary about ancient Egypt. They talked about the magnificent pyramids, right? The engineering marvels, the hieroglyphics, the mummies. But did they mention that the Great Pyramid of Giza was built by a king whose parents were likely siblings? That the Sphinx might have been carved by the product of incest? Of course not, because that would ruin the mystique. That would make ancient Egypt less mysterious and more monstrous. Here's the truth they don't want to discuss. For 3 millennia, the most powerful civilization on Earth was ruled by a succession of genetic disasters. People so inbred that modern geneticists struggle to untangle their DNA. And it wasn't hidden, it wasn't shameful, it was policy. The ancient Egyptians had a word for it: keeping the blood pure. The pharaoh wasn't just a king, he was a god on earth, a direct descendant of Ra, the sun god himself. And gods don't marry mortals, gods marry other gods. And who else had divine blood? Your sister, your daughter, sometimes your mother. Let me take you inside the palace of Amenhotep IV. You know him as Akhenaten, around 1350 BCE. The morning sun filters through alabaster windows, casting strange shadows across his elongated face. His wife, Nefertiti, watches as he struggles to rise from bed, his spine curved in ways that make standing straight impossible. His hips, wider than his shoulders, give him an almost feminine appearance that court artists will carefully disguise in their portraits. "My lord requires assistance," a servant whispers, but Akhenaten waves him away. He doesn't want to be touched. His skin, stretched thin over his unusual skeleton, bruises at the slightest pressure. His fingers, impossibly long and spider-like, grip the bed frame as he pulls himself up. This is your god king. This is what generations of sibling marriage created. Imagine being 12 years old in ancient Thebes, playing with your sister in the palace courtyard. The sound of sistrum rattles echoes from the nearby temple. The air smells of lotus blossoms and the ever-present undercurrent of the Nile's muddy banks. You're playing Senet, the game of passing, and she's winning as always. Your parents, who are also siblings, watch from the shade of the colonnade, their faces bearing the telltale signs, the slightly bulging eyes, the elongated skull carefully hidden under elaborate headdresses, the weak chin that runs in the family. In 2 years, this girl across from you won't just be your sister anymore, she'll be your wife. This is tradition, this is divine mandate. This is what keeps the gods happy and the Nile flooding. But here's where it gets worse. It wasn't just the pharaohs. The entire royal court, desperate to be close to divinity, copied their rulers. Cousins married cousins, uncles married nieces. For 3,000 years, the Egyptian elite turned themselves into a genetic experiment that would horrify any modern scientist. Let me put this in perspective for you. In America, marrying your first cousin is illegal in 24 states and considered backward in the rest. The Egyptians were marrying their full siblings, sharing not 12.5% of their DNA like first cousins, but 50%. That's the same genetic overlap you have with your own parents. Now imagine doing that for 3,000 years straight. The Ptolemaic dynasty, Cleopatra's family line, took this to its absolute extreme. They ruled Egypt for 275 years, and in that entire time, there were maybe 2 or 3 marriages outside the family. Cleopatra VII, the famous one, had a family tree so intertwined that geneticists need specialized software just to map it. Her parents were likely uncle and niece. Her grandparents were siblings. Going back just 6 generations, instead of having 64 great-grandparents like you do, she had roughly 16. Think about your own family reunions. That awkward cousin who corners you by the potato salad. That uncle who tells the same stories every year. Your siblings who know exactly which buttons to push. Imagine if everyone there, your aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings, that was your entire dating pool. Forever, for 30 generations, that was royal life in ancient Egypt. But why? Why would any civilization do this to itself? The answer is both simpler and more disturbing than you might think. Power. Pure, undiluted power. Because if you're the only family with divine blood and you never let that blood leave the family, then you never have to share power with anyone else. No ambitious noble can marry into your line and claim the throne. No foreign prince can seduce your daughter and take half your kingdom. The throne stays in the family because the family is all there is. And for a while, centuries actually, it worked. Egypt remained one of the most powerful nations on earth despite its rulers becoming increasingly deformed. Because here's the thing about being a god king. When you can have anyone who questions you fed to crocodiles, nobody questions you. When the priests, whose power depends on you being divine, are the ones teaching the people, nobody learns the truth. The cover-up began immediately. Have you ever noticed how Egyptian art shows everyone in profile? That wasn't just artistic style, it was the easiest way to hide facial deformities. That beautiful, elegant Egyptian art style we admire, it was propaganda designed to make the increasingly deformed royalty look normal, even beautiful. Walk through any museum's Egyptian collection and really look at the statues of Akhenaten. Even the propaganda couldn't completely hide the truth. Those strange proportions, the elongated skull, the feminine hips, the drooping belly, Egyptologists spent decades claiming this was just artistic symbolism, representing the pharaoh as both mother and father of his people. But when Dr. Erwin Braverman from Yale analyzed the statues in 2008, he concluded Akhenaten likely suffered from Marfan syndrome, or a similar genetic disorder. The art wasn't symbolic, it was diagnostic. The mummification process itself became part of the cover-up. Modern CT scans of royal mummies show that embalmers went to extraordinary lengths to make their pharaohs look normal in death. King Tut's mummy had subcutaneous packing, basically ancient plastic surgery performed post-mortem to fill out his misshapen skull. His clubbed foot was carefully wrapped to look normal. His cleft palate was hidden with resin-soaked linen. But you can't hide everything, and this is where it gets truly disturbing. When Howard Carter catalogued Tutankhamun's tomb, he found those 130 walking sticks I mentioned, not ceremonial staffs, not symbols of power, walking sticks, for a pharaoh who died at 19. The official story, they were for the afterlife. The truth? DNA analysis in 2010 revealed that Tut had a vascular bone necrosis in his left foot. His bones were literally dying from lack of blood flow. His left foot was clubbed and rotated internally. His right foot was flat. This teenager, supposedly a god on earth, could barely walk. Those weren't ceremonial objects. They were medical equipment for a genetic disaster barely able to stand. I want you to imagine the reality of Tutankhamun's daily life. Each morning, servants would have to massage his twisted feet before he could even attempt to stand. The pain, according to medical experts who've studied his remains, would have been excruciating. Bone grinding against dying bone with every step. The smell of the medicinal ointments, myrrh, frankincense, honey, constantly applied to reduce swelling. The sound of his uneven gait echoing through the palace halls. Step drag, the walking stick tapping against stone. But Tut was lucky compared to his children. 2 mummified fetuses were found in his tomb. His daughters, genetic analysis confirmed. His daughters, who were also his nieces, because Tut's wife, Akhenaten, was probably his half-sister. Both fetuses showed severe spinal deformities, including spina bifida and scoliosis. Neither would have survived birth. This was the price of keeping the blood pure. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but that's just one family, one dynasty. Number. This was systematic across 3 millennia. The 18th dynasty did it. The 19th dynasty did it. The Ptolemies turned it into an art form. 30 centuries of siblings marrying siblings, of uncles marrying nieces, of genetic lines so tangled that modern computers struggle to map them. Let's talk about Amenhotep III, one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs. Ruled at the height of Egyptian power, built massive temples, commissioned countless statues. Father of the famous Akhenaten. While he married Tia, who wasn't his sister, he also married 2 of his own daughters, Shitamun and Isis. Ancient inscriptions literally call them king's daughter, king's wife. He suffered from obesity so severe he could barely move, arthritis that left him bedridden, and dental abscesses that oozed pus into his bloodstream. This was Egyptian greatness, a morbidly obese king who married his own daughters, dying from an infected tooth. But here's the most disturbing part. They knew. The ancient Egyptians weren't stupid. They could see that royal children died more often than common ones. They could see the deformities, the club feet, the early deaths. Medical papyri from the period describe conditions we now recognize as genetic disorders, always more common in royal families. They knew something was wrong, they just didn't care. Or rather, they cared more about power than people. Because every deformed prince, every stillborn princess, every pharaoh who died at 20 from what should have been a minor infection, they were all acceptable losses in the game of keeping power in the family. The priests, who should have been the moral guardians, were the worst enablers. They created elaborate theological justifications for incest. The god Osiris married his sister Isis, so should the pharaoh. The god Set married his sister Nephthys, divine precedent for royal incest. They turned a genetic disaster into religious doctrine, and it worked so well that when the Greeks conquered Egypt under Alexander the Great, they didn't stop the practice. They adopted it. The Ptolemaic dynasty, despite being Macedonian Greeks, went native in the worst possible way. Cleopatra VII, that supposed beauty who seduced Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. She was the product of more systematic incest than any European royal family would ever attempt. Modern facial reconstruction based on coin portraits and written descriptions, we don't have Cleopatra's actual remains, shows a woman with a prominent nose, a strong jaw, and a notably recessed chin. Not exactly Elizabeth Taylor. The Roman historian Plutarch, who had access to people who knew her, never once called her beautiful. He wrote that her beauty was not altogether incomparable. That's ancient Roman shade, for she had a great personality. But even Cleopatra knew the game was up. When she had children, it was with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, outsiders, fresh blood. Because by the end of 3 centuries of Ptolemaic incest, even the pharaohs realized they were running out of genetic runway. The cover-up continued long after Egypt fell. When Napoleon's expedition rediscovered Egypt in 1798, they found the evidence but didn't understand it. When the British started excavating in the 1800s, they found it but didn't want to believe it. Victorian sensibilities couldn't handle the idea that the great civilization they admired was built on incest. Even today, in 2024, the cover-up continues in subtle ways. Museum placards will tell you Tutankhamun died from malaria or a chariot accident. Technically true, but missing the point that his immune system was so compromised from inbreeding that a mosquito bite could kill him. They'll mention that Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten for religious reasons, not that he was probably trying to justify his genetic deformities as divine transformation. Go to any museum website right now. Look up their Egyptian collection. Count how many times they use words like divine marriage or royal tradition versus how many times they use the word incest. The cover-up isn't a conspiracy. It's marketing, because Come See Our Exhibition of Incest Mummies doesn't sell as many tickets as Discover the Mysteries of the Pharaohs. But the evidence is all there, hidden in plain sight. Every elongated skull dismissed as ritual head binding, every clubbed foot explained as battle injury, every early death attributed to ancient disease. The truth is simpler and more horrible. 3,000 years of systematic incest destroyed the ruling class of one of history's greatest civilizations. The final insult, it was all for nothing. The incest didn't keep their blood pure, it poisoned it. It didn't preserve their power, it destroyed it. By the time Rome conquered Egypt, the pharaohs were so genetically compromised that they could barely produce living children. The mighty bloodline of the sun, god Ra, ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. drowning in its own corrupted genes. Modern genetic analysis of royal mummies shows the truth in horrifying detail. Malaria resistance genes, common in the general Egyptian population, were absent in the royals. Beneficial mutations that should have accumulated over millennia were missing. Instead, they had genetic markers for clubfoot, cleft palate, scoliosis, and a dozen other disorders most of us have never heard of. 3,000 years of evolution, working backward. Think about that the next time you're in a museum, staring at King Tut's golden mask. That beautiful, serene face isn't showing you a boy king. It's showing you what the embalmers wished he had looked like. The real Tutankhamun, the club-footed, cleft-palated, immune-compromised teenager who needed 130 walking sticks, that's the one they don't want you to see. Because if you saw the real pharaohs, if you understood what 3 millennia of incest really looked like, you'd never see ancient Egypt the same way again. The pyramids would stop being monuments to greatness and become monuments to genetic madness. The mummies would stop being mysterious and become medical warnings. The entire civilization would be revealed for what it was, a 3,000-year cautionary tale about the price of keeping power in the family. The cover-up continues because the truth is bad for business. Museum ticket sales, documentary ratings, Hollywood movies, they all depend on Egypt being mysterious and magnificent, not diseased and deformed. So the next time you visit a museum, look closer. Look at those statues with their strange proportions. Look at those mummies with their carefully hidden deformities. Look at the walking sticks, the medical equipment, the child-sized coffins that outnumber the adult ones. The evidence has always been there. We just chose not to see it. Because sometimes a beautiful lie is easier to swallow than an ugly truth. Even when that truth has been hiding in every pyramid for 3,000 years.